Happy Monday morning, everybody. Do you remember a week ago how we all spent Labor Day weekend and it totally took over the internet? We were all wondering if Donald Trump was dead or dying. You remember that? Yeah. What if he had died? What if he had died? Jonathan V. Last at the Bulwark put out an article a week ago that I wanted to cover last week. Was one of his daily triad newsletters from last Tuesday, September 2nd, just titled The Death of Trump. And he wrote that after we had spent the whole weekend, and it totally took over Twitter and TikTok, that Donald Trump was either dead or dying. There were street closures in Washington, D.C. They had shut down all the roads around Walter Reed Hospital, and speculation was going crazy. And so JVL did a newsletter like, okay, let's game this out. Let's game this out. What would happen? And this was the day that this newsletter came out last Tuesday, when it was announced that Donald Trump was going to do some announcement at 2 p.m., and it just ended up being a Space Force thing. And he analogizes a lot of this stuff to a movie that came out in 2017 called The Death of Stalin, which is a satirical comedy about a former leader in Russia that I haven't seen yet, but I'm going to watch it now after reading this newsletter. So he says, there are a few baseline scenarios that we can work from. 1, Trump leaves office peaceful in 2029 without having sought re-election and eventually just passes away. 2, Trump dies sometime between now and January 2028 before he has declared his intentions on running for re-election. 2A, Trump dies sometime after declaring his intentions on running for re-election, but before the election while still in office. So before this term runs out. 3, Trump runs for re-election in 2028 for a third term. He wins and is the sitting president in his third term when he dies at some point after January 2029. Or 3A, Trump runs for re-election in 2028, loses, then dies while out of office, but actively pursuing another return to power. I love JVL's imagination, dark as it usually is. There are other permutations, but the important underlying difference among these scenarios is that either Trump is holding power or he's merely making a claim on power when he dies. If Trump is the sitting president, whether he's in his second term or third term, the line of succession is clear. JD Vance or his vice president, if it's not JD Vance in the third term, becomes president. In the story of the death of Stalin, there's a guy named Grigory Malenkov who was Stalin's chief deputy. He assumed the premiership of the Soviet Union immediately following Stalin's death, but being handed that kind of an office of leadership is not the same as having control over a movement. Malenkov was a dullard, and Nikita Khrushchev outmaneuvered him over the next 2 years and eventually took power. And that was, I think, in the late 40s, early 50s, somewhere around there. And then it was Khrushchev who, gave us the Cuban Missile Crisis and things like that. If, just for the sake of argument, JD Vance was Trump's vice president when he passed on, I would not assume JD Vance to be anything more than a temporary leader of the Trumpist movement. That dude has Malenkov written all over him. So what would happen after Trump's vice president took power? There would be a lot of bowing and scraping as ambitious Trumpists pretended to get on board, but behind the scenes they'd be maneuvering to dump Vance at the first available moment. Boy, ain't that the truth. Immediately following Trump's death, Vance will be desperate to win the public backing of the Trump children, especially Ivanka and Don Jr. For legitimacy purposes. Yeah. The question then is who would end up with control of the MAGA movement? It's possible that Vance might just by default, but maybe not. Everyone and their brother would take a shot. Kristi, Noem, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz, Little Marco, maybe even Stephen Miller. The point is, either someone will consolidate power over MAGA or no one will. And it's even possible that this cult of personality just completely falls apart without Trump. I think that's the most likely scenario, but that's just my opinion. What if Trump is not president when he dies? That's bad news for JD Hillbilly, obviously, but good news for everyone else because they no longer have to take the movement away from someone else. They just have to inherit it. And JVL goes on to say that's a messier proposition in some ways, but ultimately it gets to the post-Trump equilibrium more quickly without the intermediary step of a Vance caretaker administration. And in this case, the dynastic solution is more easily achievable, meaning Trump's kids. If Trump dies in office, there will be pressure for Ivanka and Don Jr. to bless JD Vance as their father's successor. But what if it's January 28th and Trump has been openly toying with running for a third term when he dies? Now there's room for someone other than Vance to fulfill Trump's legacy. It's pretty obvious to the author that that person would be one of the Trump children. Yeah. Columnist Damon Linker observes that Trump is a particular kind of autocrat. He sits at the head of an ideological movement, but is himself not particularly ideological. Trump ran for president to stay out of prison and make money. That's Trump's ideology, period. Instead, he focused on looting and self-aggrandizement. Yeah, he discovered what the presidency is worth. Not millions of dollars, but billions of dollars. Trump's taken in something like $8 billion since becoming the president this term. It's insane. Why would the Trump family let go of that asset, that money-making goose that laid the golden egg? JD Vance's long game is clearly an attempt to convince stronger candidates like Tucker Carlson or Don Jr. to not succeed Trump. He will tell them that the job of president is too much work, that he can deliver everything these guys want for them while they live a life of leisure. But that only works if what the Trump children want is ideological and policy-based. What if the Trump children just want to keep making money? How would President Vance do that for them? The obvious answer is that he can't. Once the Trump family no longer controls the Republican Party, which gives it an even money chance to control U.S. government every 4 years, the money machine turns off. Does that sound like something a Trump would do? In the Death of Stalin, Stalin's kids, Svetlana is a dilettante and Vasily is a drunk hidden from public view. In our time, Ivanka and her husband control a hedge fund. Laura Trump has a TV career. Don Jr. is a MAGA folk hero. And the family is working with a $5 billion crypto war chest. Why wouldn't they continue in the family business? And if they tried, who would or who could stop them? God. And there's the possibility that no one is able to consolidate power in MAGA. What happens then? Does the movement fall apart or morph into something else? And he invites discussion in the comments. As always, everybody knows I'm a big fan of the Bulwark. I disagree with the folks who are on the Bulwark almost daily on substantive issues, but when I consume their content, I always learn something. It always makes me think, and it always helps me refine my own arguments for things. And so I really encourage everybody to subscribe to the Bulwark and the Atlantic and Talking Points memos. Those are like my 3 go-tos. And you get JVL's daily newsletter if you subscribe to the Bulwark. And he writes a lot of pieces like that that just make you think about things in like actual real world terms. It's like, well, what if Trump does die? What happens after that? And he comes up with all those scenarios to go through. And it's beneficial to think about. And it's often amusing to ponder as well. So subscribe to the Bulwark. I'll see you guys soon. It's Monday. Have a great week.